Hello, YouTube! So we've been spending a lot of time talking about composers of the more classical vein, and today I thought that we'd talk about something a little bit more, what do the kids call it, hip? Now, you may be surprised to hear this, what with my intense focus on classical music, but I'm actually quite a huge classic rock fan. My daddy raised me on his vinyl collection of the classics, and to this day, and probably for the rest of my life, my first preset channel on my car radio will always be the classic rock station. I have always been fascinated by the lives of rock musicians, and one thing that has always fascinated me is the 27 Club. Within a span of 2 years, some of the greatest names and talents in classic rock died at the age of 27. At the time, there was shock and horror at these losses, but it wasn't until another rocker's death in the 90s that this club became known as the 27 Club. Well, let's start with the first death. Founding member of the Rolling Stones, Louis Brian Hopkins Jones, was a phenomenal guitarist. He lived the rock style of drugs, sex, rock and roll, until it actually began to catch up with his performance in the band. After getting arrested for a second time in possession of marijuana, the band members decided to kick Brian out of the band. His mental state after getting kicked out varies according to different accounts. Some people say he was really excited to begin a solo career, where others say he was really dark and depressed. Whatever his mental state, on July 3rd in 1969, he was found in his swimming pool drowned in Sussex, England. A little more than a year later came the death of another amazing guitarist, blues and psychedelic rock legend Jimi Hendrix. Jimi only had about 4 years of public exposure before he died, but during those 4 years he made a huge impact on the genre of rock. By experimenting with overdriven amplifiers, feedback, stereophonic phasing, and even the wah-wah pedal, he created a totally new sound that people went nuts over. We're listening right now to a great example of his song, one of my favorite all-time Jimi Hendrix performances, the national anthem at Woodstock. That Woodstock album got played at many a Sunday brunch in my household. Unfortunately, in the morning on September 18th in London, after a very nice date night with a woman named Monica, he was found unconscious but breathing. He was brought to the hospital, but he unfortunately died of an overdose there later. He died of asphyxiation by choking on his own vomit, which was caused by an overdose of sleeping pills and a lot of red wine. Because this whole 27 Club isn't weird enough anyway, the other really bizarre thing about it is that every single member of this at least 1969 to 1971 group was really connected with each other. For example, after Brian Jones passed away, Jimi Hendrix dedicated a song to him on US national television, which happened pretty shortly before he himself died. But from there, let's get to my girl Janice Joplin, who died only 16 days after Jimi Hendrix did. Now, I love Janice Joplin. I cannot tell you how many times I've listened to Mercedes-Benz. Probably one of the first songs I ever learned to play on the ukulele. Janice originally gained fame by being the lead singer in the band Big Brother and the Holding Company. She went solo in 1969 and quickly just shot up in fame. She performed at Woodstock and even Madison Square Garden. As famous as she was for her music, she was also very well known for her extensive use of drugs and alcohol. But, you know, as a young, wild hippie, no one really expected anything else from her. Unfortunately, in October of 1970, this lifestyle caught up with her when she died of an overdose of heroin in a motel room in Los Angeles. She was at the time recording Pearl, and actually the last thing she ever recorded was Mercedes-Benz. And for another connection, Janice Joplin and Jimi Hendrix were considered two of the best acts to appear at Woodstock, and they even recorded some stuff together. We're currently listening to a collaboration they did with the song Summertime. And less than a year later, we get to the death of one of the greatest American poets, James Morrison. While Jim was many things, he's best remembered as being the frontman for The Doors. From a very young age, he began suffering from drug and alcohol addictions, and one time he even passed out on stage. And yet, even with his crazy rock lifestyle, he wrote some of the most amazing stuff to hit the rock genre ever. In July of 1961, Morrison was found dead in his bathtub in his Paris apartment. There was no evidence of foul play, so by French law there was no autopsy performed, but it's assumed he died also of a heroin overdose. And for another bizarre, odd 27 coincidence, his girlfriend at the time actually died 3 years later, also of a heroin overdose, and also at the age of 27. And to bring this full cycle, James Morrison actually wrote a poem titled Ode to LA while thinking of Brian Jones, deceased. So, he wrote a poem in eulogy of Brian Jones and then died himself about 2 years later. It's too much. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, this club wasn't named the 27 Club until the 1990s. This happened with the death of the frontman for Nirvana, Kurt Cobain. Cobain was known as the spokesman of his generation, especially after the success of the album Smells Like Teen Spirit. Unfortunately for Cobain, he wasn't very comfortable being in the limelight, and all of his crazy success led to a lot of drugs and alcohol in order to handle media pressures. After a failed stint in rehab that lasted 1 day, hello Lindsay Lohan, right? His body was found with a gunshot wound to the head in his house. There was also a suicide note that read, "I haven't felt the excitement of listening to as well as creating music, along with really writing for too many years now." How's that? Since Kurt Cobain was added and started the creation of the 27 Club, many other musicians have been added to the club as well. Most recently, Amy Winehouse was added in 2011 when she died of alcohol poisoning. Other members include Robert Johnson, a famous blues singer and musician, Jesse Belvin, an R&B singer, pianist, and songwriter, and Ron Pigpen McKernan, who, if you don't know, which you should, was a founding member, keyboardist, singer for the Grateful Dead. I hope you enjoyed this video. I myself have always found this topic to be extremely interesting, and also incredibly sad that so much amazing talent was ripped from this world prematurely. If you learned something new, or if you enjoyed this topic, please give me a like and subscribe below. I'm always looking for suggestions, so if you have any ideas, leave me a comment below as well. Until next week, keep it real. Musicology.